you this story. South Africa and the world at large is confronted with stories and images of racism. The murder of George Floyd, global anti-racism protests, private schools embroiled in controversies, with the footage of protests and depictions of racism shown on television and in social media. Children most likely are posing some serious questions to their parents about what they're seeing, about what it all means. So how do you explain racism to your children of different ages, I suppose? Let's unpack the story now. We're joined by diversity expert Asanda Ngoasheng, who presents workshops on digital storytelling for young people to tell their lived experiences of race and of belonging. Here's her story.
Life at the new school was not as I imagined. My ears rang for 2 whole days, translating everything from Xhosa, then English, and back to Xhosa again, over and over. It was exhausting, and sometimes I would say tree instead of three, and the other kids would laugh. I fought with my mother and grandmother a lot. They kept reminding me not to change, but how could I not? They didn't understand my new world or why I had to speak English everywhere. I was alone. I didn't belong. Not in the township, not in the suburb. I lost myself in books again. I discovered more places and people. I found there were many ways of being. Slowly, I began to be comfortable in my skin again. I chose which parts of the old and new me I liked and discarded the rest. I knew who I was. I was an African, and I belonged everywhere.
And Asanda joins us now, as you can see. Asanda, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for being a part of this incredibly important conversation. As parents, you know, around not only South Africa but around the world, we're having very important conversations, and I hope we've been having these conversations even before the Black Lives Matter protests. This new wave since the murder of George Floyd has erupted in the US. But if I am a parent that has not yet addressed this issue with my children, where do I begin?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing that I always say to parents is that parents have this assumption that children don't know anything, or that children are not aware of color, or that they're not aware of race or even racism. And my advice to parents is always that you first need to understand that your children since they were born, they've been given messages about what it means to be black, they've been given messages about what it means to be white, and they've been given messages about the difference between the two races. And so if you live in South Africa, the nanny is probably black. If you live in South Africa, most of the people in service are probably black, and most of the people who are in positions of higher power are probably white. And so children know this without you even needing to tell them. They've been living this life. And so first you need to understand that they have the knowledge already, and society has already shown them and trained them on the differences, and the differences in the way the two groups of people are treated. Yeah. And so once you understand that, then you're able to craft a message, and you're able to talk to the child and say that, you know, first of all, they live in a country that has a very painful history. And what I do normally when I talk to my children, when I run workshops, is that I will normally use the language of bad guys and good guys. And I explain, you know, that there were these bad guys who were white, and they didn't want black people to live a specific life, and they created laws for that. And they didn't want black people to live in specific areas, and they created laws for that. And they didn't want black people to also go to certain schools. And I explain to my children particularly that, you know, they go to a former white school, and what does that mean? They live in a former whites only neighborhood, and what does that mean? And so it's about being completely honest, and it's about giving as much information as you can to the child, but doing it in an age-appropriate manner. And I think that a lot of parents always say to me that, you know, I get so overwhelmed when I have to think about this topic. I don't want them to, you know, if it's a black child, I don't want them to hate, white people. And if it's a white child, some of the concerns that the white parents have is that I don't want my child to hate the skin they're in, and I don't want my child to hate me and their ancestors. And my response is always that, you know, if you do a good job as a parent, if you are honest and if you explain incrementally over time. So this is not a conversation that you have in just one sitting. And the key thing to do is to look out for opportunities to have these conversations. So right now we've got Black Lives Matter, we've got all the protests going on, and children are hearing everything that's happening. and children are able to basically, hear from society what's happening. And so these are opportunities for you to start having the conversation. So when they see the images on the screen, when you are watching the news, etc., that's the opportunity to say, do you understand what's happening there? What do you think is happening?
And
Have
Asanda,
any of your friends said anything?
the point that you're making earlier in that, I think sometimes the knee-jerk reaction for some parents is to shield their children from racism. And we want to live in a world where race is not an issue for our children.
Yes.
But according to what you're saying, they're already getting the kind of messaging that you've just mentioned. The fact that the people in service are black, the fact that your nanny is most likely black, particular people in their lives are white. So they are getting those messages anyway, and it's your job as a parent to talk to them about the history of that and what it means for them.
Yes, so your job as a parent is to unpack what they already know and to help them understand it differently and to help them understand it in the best manner possible. Because if you don't do the work of unpacking, then it's imprinted in children's lives that black people are there for their service, that black people are of an inferior quality of personhood. And if you don't do your job, even as a black parent, what you are then doing is you are potentially putting your child in danger, because your child is living in this country, means they are very likely to be a victim of racism, whether it's a very mild form or it's a very strong form of being called the K word. And so your child needs to know that if somebody calls them the K word, this is what it means, and that they have a right to be offended, and that they have a right to talk to their teacher, to talk to their principal, and to definitely talk to you. And I think that, again, as a black parent, you need to explain to your children that if you're on the playground and somebody says to you, I can't play with you because you are brown, you need to make sure that as my child, you report that and you tell that to me. If you don't feel free enough to tell it to the teacher, come home and tell that to me, because children, particularly little black children, are traumatized and they don't have the language to be able to explain to their parents what they're traumatized by. And they're traumatized because they're not able to explain to their parents what's happening, and they internalize that message. And they think it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. That's why my friends don't want to play with me. And if you equip them with the language and understanding of racism, then they will be able to understand that, no, it's not me, it's that person. They are racist, or that they hold, prejudiced views against black people. And I need to either stay away from those kids, and I need to talk to my mommy about it, and I need to tell the teacher about it.
And Asanda, that's a very interesting thing that you're bringing up there, that children don't have the kind of language to make sense of racism if they've not been spoken to about it before. But before we wrap up our discussion, I want to ask you this question. We talk a lot about the responsibility of black parents to educate their children about racism. Parents in the US educating their boy children around how to deal with the police so that they come out of that situation alive. What about the responsibility of white parents to talk to their children about white privilege?
So, as I said earlier, a lot of my white friends who are white parents as well have this issue, and they have this fear, and they say, I don't want my child to ascribe meaning to race. I think that we are a colorblind family, etc., etc. And I always say that it's dangerous to raise your children to not be able to see color, because essentially what you're doing is you are training your child to not see reality, and you are training your child to not be able to pick up and understand that different people have different experiences, and those experiences inform the ways in which they are treated and inform the way in which they react to certain situations. So if you don't understand that, and you are a little white girl with a little black girl, and a dog comes and the black girl runs, you have no idea why the black girl is running, and you are going to say the most triggering thing that you can say to a black person, which is, my dog is not harmful, it's not going to bite you. But if you understand as a child and you have been trained and taught about racism and how it operates, you will be able to comfort your friend that it's okay, or if you need to leash your dog, you'll be able to do that. And so for me, the most important thing is about preventing harm, because white children who don't understand racism or haven't been spoken to about racism go out and hurt children of color in the playground. They say mean things. they tell them they can't play with them because of their race, because that's what they've seen, that's what they've heard. And so a lot of parents think that because they are liberal parents and, they are kind to black people, they forget that there are so many messages that the community and their society and their school and their church and everybody has already given them about what it means to live in a specific place.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think you and I need possibly another hour to unpack this issue, because the other question I would need to ask you is then around what do parents do when they don't recognize the issues around white privilege, for an example. But there you go. That was Asanda Ngoasheng. She's a diversity expert, giving us some advice there on, if you have children, how do you talk to them about race and about racism. Interesting discussion, that, and very important one. Still ahead for you here.